Good day. Around a week ago, I did a program for this channel in which I discussed the Ukrainian military buildup in eastern Ukraine. I said in that program that on balance, I thought it unlikely that Ukraine was intending to launch a military offensive against the two breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. I said this because in reality, the military balance in this region has shifted against Ukraine because of the very large buildup of Russian forces in the region along the Ukrainian border. Despite a certain modernization which has taken place of the Ukrainian military since the war which was fought in 2014, the strengthening of the Russian forces in the region has been on a much greater scale and more than makes up for any improvement in the Ukrainian army which has taken place since 2014. Accordingly, on the assumption that Russia would intervene to protect the two breakaway republics in the Donbass, a Ukrainian offensive would be bound, it seems to me, to lead to a comprehensive Ukrainian military defeat. And for that reason, I personally think it is unlikely that such an offensive will happen. Well, there have been some diplomatic moves since I made that program, and in particular, there was an important meeting on 18th March 2021 between the top advisors of the four countries, Russia, Germany, France, and Ukraine, which are most deeply involved in this conflict. Now, this meeting, which of course took place on a virtual basis, happened within the context of what is called the Normandy Four. This is a group of countries, Russia, Germany, France, and Ukraine, which have come together in order to try to plan a way to achieve peace in Ukraine based on the Minsk agreement, which was negotiated by Russia, Germany, France, Ukraine, and the leaders of the two breakaway republics in a meeting in Minsk in February 2015. Now, the people who took part in these talks, which took place on 18th March 2021, were very senior officials from these countries. They were, briefly, they were the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Executive Office of Russia, Dmitry Kozak. He is, by the way, a top aide of Vladimir Putin and is an extremely important official indeed. Then there was the advisor to the German Chancellor, Jan Hecker, the diplomatic advisor to the French President, Emmanuel Bon, and Ukrainian Presidential Chief of Staff, Andrei Yermak. Yermak is directly responsible and accountable to Ukrainian President Zelensky himself. Now, we have an account of what happened at this meeting from the Russian newspaper Kommersant, and I'm going to reproduce it here in this program. We've been provided by an English language summary from the Russian news agency TASS, and this is what Kommersant tells us. The parties focused on the permanent ceasefire on the line of contact and the measures, stages, and order of steps that should lead to a peaceful regulation of the region. The sides failed to come to an agreement. The full ceasefire is an issue that precedes other steps, including the humanitarian, political, and economic ones required for a total settlement in Donbass. Participants of the March 18 talks failed to make progress in this area as well. The negotiators are trying to approve steps towards peace outlined in the Minsk agreements, offering their options. A negotiator from the Russian side told Kommersant that a new summit can only be discussed after the sides manage to put an end to the attacks in Donbass and after they achieve a common understanding of what should be done next to fully regulate the conflict. None of these conditions have been met. Now, my interpretation of this report is that the Russians basically laid out the riot act. They said that Ukraine is breaching its ceasefire obligations. They're saying that Ukrainian forces must withdraw from the contact line and that there will be no further discussions or negotiations on any other topic until they do. It's also, it seems to me, fairly clear that the Russians identified the Ukraine or named the Ukraine as breaching the terms of the ceasefire. And in fact, on 19th March 2021, that's to say on the following day, there was a further dispatch from TASS, which made Russian criticisms of Ukraine and Russian claims that it is Ukraine which is violating the provisions of the ceasefire absolutely clear. Specifically, this is a report of certain comments made on Russian television by Russia's permanent representative to the OSCE, Alexander Lukashevich. He says, and this is in relation to events in eastern Ukraine, that latest statistics indicate that more than 80% of all Ukrainian heavy weapons observed by the OSCE since March 1st in Donbass outside storage areas were seen at railway stations in the Donetsk and Lugansk region. It means that forces are being actively reinforced and are approaching closer to the contact line. So a question arises, and we keep on asking it to the Ukrainian colleagues and Western nations, supporting them, what these weapons are for. In theory, as follows from Ukraine's commitments, these weapons were supposed to be withdrawn from the contact line. So Lukashevich, in this interview, has spelled out what Kozaks said on the 18th March meeting, that Ukraine is violating the ceasefire, that it is inappropriately moving its forces closer to the contact line, that it is engaging in shelling, that the Russians are aware of the fact that the Russians insist upon Ukraine withdrawing its forces, and that no further discussions or negotiations or on any other topic with respect to the conflict in Ukraine will take place until that shelling ceases, the ceasefire violations end, and the Ukrainian forces are withdrawn. Then, on the following day, March 21st, we had a further discussion on Russian television by no less a person than Kozak himself. This is, of course, the person who participated at the 18th March meeting. And Kozak, on this occasion, provided that information directly to the official Russian news agency TASS. Kozak says that he pointed out in a letter to his counterparts in the group, that's to say to the representatives of Germany, France, and Ukraine, that all parties, Russia, Germany, and France especially, were determined to ensure a sustainable ceasefire in Donbass. Kozak says that in this letter, he specifically referred to a meeting to set up a ceasefire, which was reached on July 22nd, 2020. And Kozak pointed out that it is Ukraine which is violating the terms of that ceasefire. Kozak also says that the letter that he sent to the other representatives, adds that Moscow, Berlin, and Paris have taken into account Ukraine's refusal to unconditionally comply with those obligations. Now, that suggests that the Germans and the French are backing the Russian position that it is Ukraine which is violating the terms of the ceasefire. Lastly, Kozak made a number of other references to a topic that was not actually discussed at the 18th March meeting. This relates to a number of comments made about 10 days earlier by Andrei Yermak, who is the Chief of Staff, Zelensky's Chief of Staff, and who attended the 18th March 2021 meeting. Now, Andrei Yermak said in those earlier comments that Ukraine was in the process of sorting out a new peace proposal to settle the conflict in eastern Ukraine. And Yermak also said that this peace proposal had been discussed and largely agreed with the Germans and the French and would be proposed shortly. Yermak also hinted, and there have also been hints to that effect from other Ukrainian officials, that if there was no compliance with that peace proposal from the two breakaway republics in the Donbass, then Ukraine would consider itself at liberty to take whatever steps it needed to act decisively in defense of its sovereignty. Now, that rather makes it sound as if this peace proposal is not really a peace proposal at all, but more like an ultimatum to the two Donbass breakaway republics to capitulate to Ukraine. And of course, many people saw the mobilization of Ukrainian forces on the contact line as, in effect, a threat to the two breakaway republics that unless they complied with this ultimatum, Ukraine would attack. Now, Kozak says that at this meeting on 18th March 2021, no new peace proposal of any sort appeared, and no new peace proposal from Ukraine was discussed. He also pointed out at this in this interview, which he gave with TASS, that on 19th March 2021, when the Ukrainians had hinted that they would set out this proposal, it also failed to appear. And we know from the earlier report by Kommersant that the Russians made it entirely clear that they would not even consider or look at any peace proposal at all unless and until the Ukrainians withdrew their forces back from the contact line and abided by the terms of the ceasefire that was agreed on 22nd July 2020. So where does all this leave us? It seems to me that the Russians, as I have said in advance that they are that they consider that they are going to refuse to enter into any kinds of negotiations for peace proposals, be they new peace proposals or old peace proposals from Ukraine, unless Ukraine complies with its ceasefire obligations. It seems that the Germans and the French agreed with the Russians about this. It also seems that after the Germans and the French agreed with the Russians on this, the Ukrainians dropped the idea of proposing whatever new peace agreement or ultimatum they might have had in mind. In other words, the Germans and the French are not prepared to support an ultimatum from Ukraine against the two breakaway republics. They do not want a war in eastern Ukraine. They are concerned that if such a war takes place, the Ukraine will be comprehensively defeated. They do not want a debacle of that sort on their hands, and they do not want relations with Russia made even more complicated and difficult than they already are. The Russians, in effect, have called what is increasingly looking like a Ukrainian bluff. As for the Ukrainians, having failed to get the support of the Germans and the French at this 18th March meeting, they dropped the idea for a peace proposal, or to be more precise, an ultimatum dressed up as a peace proposal, and have gone away and are apparently thinking about the situation again. Now, I am not a military expert, but what I have been told by people who are is that it is extremely difficult to keep large numbers of troops and equipment in the field, acting passively for a long time. Doing so is expensive. Morale and equipment over time slowly deteriorates, and it is far better and more appropriate to withdraw the troops and bring them back to barracks. I suspect that that is what we're going to see before very long. So, we now, I think, can draw certain preliminary conclusions from this affair. Firstly, I have to qualify them by saying that in Ukraine, nothing is ever straightforward. It may be that the Ukrainians will disregard all concerns and limitations, and perhaps encouraged by hardliners in Washington, will indeed go for broke and will launch that offensive that they've been talking about or threatening the eastern Ukrainians with, the Donbass republics with, for a long time. In that event, there will be a military crisis followed by a defeat for Ukraine, followed by a political crisis and another major breakdown in East-West Russia-Europe relations. It's possible that will happen, but it seems to me that with the Germans and the French signaling very clearly that that is not what they want to see, it is far more likely that the Ukrainians will pull back. As we saw, they did not announce this peace proposal, or really ultimatum, either at the meeting on 18th March 2021 or the following day, 19th March 2021, when they said they would. So, more probably than not, we will see with Ukrainian forces in eastern Ukraine gradually, quietly being returned to barracks before very long, over the next few days. What this affair has highlighted again is that in Ukraine and in the conflict in Ukraine, it is the Russians who hold the high cards. There is no solution to this conflict without Russia's agreement, and there is certainly no military solution to this conflict because Russia is always in a position to block one. In fact, if we're talking about military solutions, the only military solution which is conceivable is one which Russia imposes rather than one which is imposed upon it. Given that this is so, I'm going to make a further prediction, which is that with the Ukrainian crisis now in stalemate, we will see the conflict in Ukraine once more become frozen. Zelensky seems to have tried to play a strong game with the Russians and with the Europeans over the last few weeks, no doubt in order to distract attention away from the political crisis he faces in Ukraine itself. However, without European support, he was not in the end able to see it through, and that leaves him with no real option than to quietly retreat and back off. Meanwhile, the crisis in Ukraine itself continues and even deepens. There have been reports about rioters, far-right rioters, breaking into the offices of the presidential administration in Kiev, and there's still talk apparently of a impeachment process against Zelensky being prepared in the Ukrainian parliament. Ukraine's political, economic and social crises continue. No resolution to the war is in sight, and the balance on the ground continues to shift in Russia's favor and in favor of the two breakaway republics, with the Europeans, for their part, quietly admitting that fact to themselves and taking whatever steps they can to put out the fires of conflict before they flame up and get out of control. Thank you for joining me on this program. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel. Please also look me up on the other programs which we do with my colleague and friend on the Duran, our main channel. You'll find links under this video. Please also check out Alex's channel, and please also check out our new channel where we show you our interactions with our viewers on our live streams. Also, please check us out on our platforms, BitChute, Library, Rumble, and especially Odyssey, which we have found to be an absolutely wonderful platform. If you can support us in that way, please also help us through Patreon, PayPal, and Subscribestar. I would add that we accept donations and payments in Bitcoin and in other such currencies. Last but not least, please also look us up on our Discord server and check out our shop. The wonderful things you will find there are great magic mugs, our sweatshirts, our hats, our hoodies, and our wonderful t-shirts, both long-sleeved and short-sleeved, all 100% cotton. And I thank you for joining me on this program, and I look forward to you joining me on my next program on this channel. Please make sure that you're subscribed and check your subscription, and have a wonderful day.